She was standing in my kitchen. My kitchen, the one I painted myself in 2009, the one with the yellow curtains I sewed by hand, and she told me I needed to dial back my lifestyle. That was the phrase she used. Dial back my lifestyle. I was 64 years old. I had worked 31 years as a licensed practical nurse at St. Joseph's Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio. I had raised 2 children, mostly alone, after their father left when my daughter was 3 and my son was barely walking. I owned my house outright. I drove a 7-year-old Buick that I paid cash for. I went to church on Sundays, and I made my own coffee every morning because I was too stubborn to pay $5 for someone else to do it. And my daughter-in-law was standing in my kitchen telling me I needed to dial back my lifestyle. I didn't say a word. I turned back to the sink and finished washing the pan I'd used to make breakfast for her children, because that's the kind of woman I am. Or at least, that's the kind of woman I used to be. I need to back up, because if I start in the middle, none of it makes sense. And I want it to make sense. I want you to understand exactly how it happened, step by step, because I spent a long time not understanding it myself. I kept thinking I was missing something, some piece of information that would explain why my son, my boy, the one I drove to soccer practice and helped with his college applications and cried over when he walked across that graduation stage, had become someone I barely recognized. My son's name is Garrett. He is 38 years old. He works in logistics for a distribution company outside of Columbus, and last I knew, he earned somewhere around $62,000 a year. His wife, I'll call her by her name because she earned it, is Tiffany. She works part-time as a dental receptionist. Together they bring in somewhere around $80,000 annually. Maybe more, because she got a raise 2 years ago and made sure to mention it at Thanksgiving. They have 2 children, a boy, 9, and a girl, 6. I love those grandchildren with everything I have. That matters to this story. That's actually the center of this story, if you want to know the truth. It started small. That's always how it starts, isn't it? About 4 years ago, Garrett called me on a Tuesday evening. He said they were having a rough month. Could I cover their electric bill? It was $212. I said, of course, baby. Send me the account number. I didn't hesitate. What mother would hesitate? The next month he called again. The car payment was late. Could I help with $450? I said yes. I told myself these were temporary things. Everyone goes through tight stretches. I remembered plenty of them myself, months when I'd count out dollar bills to make sure I could cover both groceries and the gas to get to work. I didn't want my son to know that kind of stress. That's what mothers do. We absorb the pressure so our children don't have to feel it. But the calls didn't stop. They became regular. Monthly, then twice monthly, then sometimes 3 times in a single month. And after about a year, they stopped being phone calls. They became texts, just numbers. $340 for the insurance, $175 for groceries, 600 utilities are due Friday. No please, rarely a thank you. Just numbers arriving on my phone like invoices. I want to be honest about something. I kept paying. For a long time I kept paying, and I told myself it was love. I told myself that this was what family does. I had a decent pension from the hospital, not extravagant, but enough. I had Social Security on top of that. I wasn't wealthy, but I was stable, and they were struggling, and I had the means to help, so I helped. What I didn't do for a long time was look at the full picture. It was my neighbor who finally made me look. She's been on my street for 22 years, one of those women who says exactly what she means and never apologizes for it. We were having coffee on my porch one September morning, and I mentioned that I'd had a tight month because I'd helped Garrett and Tiffany cover some things. She put her mug down. She looked at me. She said, "How long has this been going on?" I said, "Oh, it comes and goes." She said, "No, I mean how long, total?" I thought about it. "About 3 years now, I guess." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Do you know how much you've given them?" I didn't. I genuinely didn't know. I'd never added it up because adding it up felt like keeping score, and keeping score felt like something a bad mother would do. Generous people don't track their generosity. That's what I believed. She told me to go look. That night, I sat down at my kitchen table with my bank statements. I went back 37 months. I had a yellow legal pad and a pen, and I started writing down every transfer, every Venmo, every check, every time I'd driven to their house with cash in an envelope, because Tiffany said electronic transfers took too long. I wrote for 2 hours. When I was done, I had 89 entries on that yellow pad. I sat back and looked at the number at the bottom of the page, and I didn't move for a long time. $43,720 in 37 months. I had given my son and his wife $43,720, and they were still, as of that week, asking for more. I went to bed that night, but I didn't sleep. I lay there on my back staring at the ceiling, and I thought about what $43,000 meant to me. It was a year and a half of my pension. It was the roof I'd been putting off replacing. It was the trip to New Orleans I'd promised myself after I retired, the one I kept saying I'd get to next year. I thought about what $43,000 meant to them, and that's when I started doing math. I should have done a long time ago. Garrett's salary, Tiffany's salary, their rent, I knew what it was because I'd helped pay it. Their car payments, both cars because I'd helped pay it. Their car payments, both cars because I'd helped with those too. Their streaming subscriptions, the gym memberships, the weekend trips they posted on Facebook. I followed them on Facebook. I had seen the pictures. A long weekend in Nashville the previous spring. A beach trip in July. Tiffany's birthday dinner at a steakhouse downtown where the entree started at $45. New furniture in their living room. A new laptop Garrett said he needed for work. Meanwhile, I had been eating more chicken and less fish because chicken was cheaper. I had been putting off my dental work because I was trying not to dip into my savings. I had told myself it was fine. I had told myself I didn't need much. But here's the thing that broke something open in me that night. It wasn't the money. Not exactly. Money is just paper and numbers. What broke something open was the memory of the last time I'd visited their house. I had driven 40 minutes to bring my grandchildren birthday presents. My granddaughter had just turned 6. I pulled up and knocked on the door, and Tiffany answered, and the first thing she said to me, before hello, before come in, before anything, was that I'd come at a bad time. And they were about to sit down for dinner. I was standing on the porch with 2 wrapped gifts and a grocery bag of food I'd made for them. She didn't open the door any wider. She took the gifts from me through the gap and said Garrett would call me later. He didn't call. I drove 40 minutes home alone, with my grocery bag still in the back seat. I thought about that moment as I lay there that night. And I thought about something I'd heard at church a long time ago, something about how you can tell what a person truly values by watching where they put their energy, not what they say, what they do. They had never once driven to my house to bring me anything. They had never offered to help me with a bill, not even when I mentioned that my water heater was failing, and I was looking at $800 for a replacement. They had never said, on their own initiative, without me asking, "Mom, are you doing okay? Do you need anything?" But the texts kept coming, and I kept answering them. I got up at 5 in the morning and made coffee, and I sat at my kitchen table with that yellow legal pad, and I read every entry again. Slowly this time, I thought about who I wanted to be, not who I had been. That woman was exhausted and smaller than she deserved to be. Who I wanted to be. I didn't make any calls that day. I didn't send any texts. I went to work in my garden, and I let myself think. Over the next 2 weeks, I did something I should have done much earlier. I started paying attention to my own finances the way I'd been managing other people's emergencies. I sat with a financial counselor at my credit union. A young woman named, I think, Peggy, very no-nonsense, very kind, and I laid it all out. She looked at my pension, my social security, my savings, the rate at which I'd been depleting them. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Miss Eloise, at the rate you've been going, you would have run into serious trouble within 4 years. I am 64 years old. Serious trouble in 4 years means serious trouble at 68. That means no cushion for medical emergencies. That means possibly having to sell my house. That means depending on someone else at exactly the moment in life when I have worked hardest to not have to depend on anyone." I drove home from that appointment, and I sat in my car in my own driveway for a while. There's a version of this story where I confronted them, where I called Garrett and had a long, tearful conversation about boundaries and love and what family really means. I have watched enough television and listened to enough advice to know that's the version people expect. That's not what I did. What I did was simpler and quieter, and, I think, more honest. I went through my bank account. I made a list. Garrett's Venmo. The automatic transfer I'd set up for their rent contribution. The account I'd added myself to so I could pay their electric bill directly. The credit card they had access to that I told myself was just for emergencies. The phone plan. I was still paying for Garrett's line because we'd been on a family plan since he was 17, and somehow that had just never changed. 89 payments, across 9 different accounts and methods. I spent one afternoon untangling all of it. Removed myself from accounts. Cancelled the automatic transfer. Closed the credit card access. Called the phone company, and had Garrett's line separated from my plan. They'd sent him a notification about the billing change, and I let them. I didn't call Garrett first. I didn't explain. I didn't ask permission from anyone to stop giving away money I'd spent 31 years earning. That was on a Thursday. By Sunday I had 4 missed calls from Garrett and 2 texts from Tiffany. Garrett's texts were terse at first to call me, then longer, then by Sunday evening, hurt and confused. Tiffany's 2 texts were not about hurt or confusion. They were about specific amounts and specific due dates. I read them. I didn't respond right away. When I called Garrett back, he asked me what happened. He said the electric company had called about a past due balance. He said his phone had gotten a notice about being moved to a separate plan. He said he didn't understand. I told him I loved him. He said, "Mom, what's going on?" I said, "I went back through my records, Garrett. 37 months, 89 payments, $43,720. Silence on his end. Long silence. Silence on his end. Long silence." I said, "I met with someone at the credit union. She told me that if I kept going the way I was going, I'd be in real trouble by the time I'm 68. I can't do that to myself. I'm not going to do that to myself." He started to say something about the timing, about the electric bill, about how they'd get caught up. I said, "Baby, I need you to hear me. This isn't about one bill. This is about the fact that you and your wife earn a living wage together, and somehow the bills have still been landing on me for 3 years. I love you. I love those grandbabies. But I am done." He was quiet again. I let the quiet sit there. Finally he said, "You could have told me." That nearly undid me. "You could have told me," as if I hadn't been waiting for him to notice, as if I hadn't been hoping, months after month, that one of those texts would be followed by a phone call where he said, "Hey Mom, we're getting back on our feet. We've got this. Thank you for everything. You can stop now." I said, "You're right. I should have. I'm telling you now." We didn't speak for 3 weeks after that. During those 3 weeks I learned something about myself. I had assumed that stopping would feel like loss, like punishment, like I was the one being cut off from something. I'd been afraid of it for so long that I'd kept writing checks and sending transfers rather than face whatever was on the other side of no. But the other side of no turned out to be quiet, clean, like opening a window in a room that had been closed too long. I fixed my water heater. I scheduled the dental work I'd been avoiding. I called my sister in Atlanta, and we planned a trip to Savannah in the spring. Not extravagant, just 4 days. But I had the money now, and I had the time, and I had nobody to ask permission from. I bought fresh salmon at the grocery store for the first time in almost a year. I know that sounds small, but it didn't feel small. Tiffany never reached out to me directly beyond those first 2 texts. I don't know what she told herself about what happened. I don't know what story she constructed. I suspect she found someone else to be angry at, because women like Tiffany always do. Garrett reached out after 3 weeks. He called on a weeknight and he was different, quieter. He didn't mention the bills. He didn't ask me for anything. He asked how I was doing. He asked about my garden. He asked about my sister. Then, after about 20 minutes of conversation, he said, "Mom, I want to apologize." I waited. He said he hadn't realized how much he'd been asking. He said he thought because I always said yes, it meant it was always fine. He said he and Tiffany had been, and here he paused for a while. He said they'd been living in a way that wasn't sustainable, and that it had been easier to let me carry some of it than to face what they were actually doing. I told him I appreciated that. I did. It's not nothing, a 38-year-old man calling his mother and saying he was wrong. I know how hard that is. I also told him gently that she always says yes is not the same as she is okay. I told him that sometimes love says yes when it should say no, and sometimes the most loving thing a person can do is stop saying yes so the people they love can figure out how to stand on their own. He said he understood. I believe he meant it. I think he's still working on what it means in practice. We talk every week now, and the conversations are different, easier somehow, now that I'm not carrying something I was never supposed to carry. The grandchildren came to visit last month. Garrett brought them on a Saturday morning, and I made pancakes, and we played in the backyard until noon, and my granddaughter asked me to braid her hair the way I used to when she was younger. I sat on the porch with her between my knees and I braided her hair, and she hummed to herself and the sun was coming through the maple tree, and I thought, this is it. This is what was always supposed to be here. It wasn't there before because I was too tired to see it. I'd given so much to things that didn't grow that I had nothing left for the things that did. Tiffany was not with them on that visit. I don't know what that means long term. That's not my story to manage. What I know is that my son looked lighter than I'd seen him in years. He helped me carry some things in from my car without being asked. He stayed until 3 in the afternoon. Before he left, he hugged me in the doorway and said, "I missed you, Mom." I said, "I've been right here. I have replaced the roof, finally. It took 3 weeks and made a mess of my yard and cost more than I wanted to spend. But it is done, and when the rain comes now, nothing leaks." I went to Savannah with my sister in April. We stayed in a little inn 2 blocks from the waterfront and ate shrimp and grits and drank sweet tea on a porch every evening, and I did not think about a single payment due date the entire 4 days. I am 64 years old. I have 31 years of work behind me, and I do not know exactly how many ahead of me. But I know what they will look like now, and I know what they will not look like. What they will not look like is a woman counting out money she earned so that other adults don't have to face the consequences of the choices they made. What they will not look like is a woman so afraid of her own, know that she says yes until there's nothing left. What they will look like is this: salmon on Tuesdays, a fixed roof, calls from my son that are just calls, not asks, a granddaughter's hair in my hands, Savannah in the spring. It took me 89 payments to get here, but I got here.